DIMO had made it. DIMO successfully transported himself to a dimension away from Zeroy. He looked around for Zeroy, yet there was no trace of him. Zeroy was just a mere second too late to catch DIMO. The people look at the island from this dimension. Since the mothership was built to travel interdimensionally when required, many of the ship's systems were integrated with interdimensional indicator databases. These would depict the name, relative date, general history, and, if known, fate for the dimension it was within. This current dimension was known as the Treq dimension. The island here is comparable to the one in Chapter 2, Part 3 of AFTERTREQ. This dimension shows what would have resulted if the volcano that devastated the island never transferred over during Crimson's dimension shift. This meant that there was no need to evacuate to the moon, and that society could continue to expand and advance. In this dimension, the infamous Biggie Slosh had children. One of Biggie Slosh's descendants was a man known as Lil Slog. Lil Slog took up after his ancestors, living a life very similar to how Biggie Slosh did. He would drive around in the Slogmobile, which was based on a model that was passed down in the Slosh bloodline. However, just like his ancestors, Lil Slog would get into trouble. During this era, new models of the Span R were developed as a result of Biggie Slosh defeating the original one. These newer generations were deemed Span Ms, standing for Super Preeminent Artificial Non-Organic Machine. Each of these machines had their own vehicle to counter crime in the cities. These were called the Rookies, and were designed to outperform most vehicles on the island. Lil Slog challenged this idea by escaping Span Ms many times with his Slogmobile. However, even with the presence of Lil Slog, crime was not any more prevalent than it had always been. A portal rips open. A gray arm reaches out from the other side. Zeroy had finally found the dimension that DIMO was hiding in. DIMO hesitates out of fear, but shakes off the feeling. He throws a punch towards Zeroy, but he dodges it. Zeroy was furious. DIMO was truly terrified. He turned to attempt to escape again through another portal. Zeroy was quicker this time and chased after DIMO. But Zeroy still wasn't quick enough. DIMO had done it again. He escaped Zeroy once more. The current dimension is known as the Treq dimension. The island here is comparable to the one in Chapter 2, Part 2 of Treq. This dimension shows what would have resulted if John Carter's death ray had failed, and that the Zaders successfully took over the island. In this dimension, the Zaders appear to be dark blue in color. All life was demolished from the island, and in its place were the Zaders. Due to their large influence and power, the Zaders could not find much other use for the island other than a place to establish a few outposts. DIMO knew where this was going. Zeroy was relentless and would not stop until he killed him. If only Zeroy understood the true extent of what he was trying to accomplish. Suddenly, another portal rips open again. Zeroy crawls out of it aggressively, immediately charging for DIMO. Zeroy attacks, but doesn't hit anything. DIMO was already gone. The current dimension is known as the Treq dimension. The island here is comparable to the one in Chapter 3, Part 10 of Treq. This dimension shows what would have happened if Leroy won the fight against Voldir. The people noticed something odd about this dimension. The interdimensional indicator detected the presence of two gods in this dimension within the recent past. One of them came from the Treq dimension, while the other one perished to the wrath of Carminium Leroy. According to the relative time of the year that DIMO traveled to, though, this god from the Treq universe must have been the god from centuries ago. In this dimension, Leroy absorbed the power of the Treq dimension's version of the Scarlet Pyramid, the Carminium Pyramid. This new power allowed him to defeat Voldir with ease, followed by the destruction of the rest of the island and its inhabitants. DIMO knew that Zeroy would be more prepared to fight back with every time he tried to escape. He knew that he couldn't keep getting lucky with these escapes. He would have to fight back at some point. DIMO looked down at himself. He was absolutely not in the condition to fight at this moment. He just needed a little more time. Suddenly, a rip in the space started to form once more. Zeroy finally found where DIMO was. DIMO searched, locating Carminium Leroy on the surface of the island he took over. Now that he was the god of the Treq's dimension from killing the previous one, he could be strong enough to hold off Zeroy for just a moment longer. DIMO communicates through Carminium Leroy's thoughts. I am DIMO, god of gods. You are ordered to fight the being emerging out of this portal to your death. Failure to obey this order will result in your death regardless. An inevitable demise awaits you, but fret not, your death will not go in vain. Zeroy bursted out of the portal, noticing DIMO attempting to escape once more through his own tear in space. Zeroy charges towards DIMO, when abruptly, out of the corner of his eye, Carminium Leroy charges at him for a sneak attack. Zeroy dodges the attack swiftly, and instantly punches straight through Carminium Leroy's chest. Zeroy quickly turned back towards DIMO and continued charging at him. He lifted his fist at DIMO, but missed. Although this one attack towards Zeroy wasted only a mere second, it caused Zeroy to be just a mere second too late. The current dimension is known as the Treq dimension. The island here is comparable to the one in Chapter 5, Part 1 of Treq. This dimension shows what would have resulted if the dimension shifting process of the island from Treq to the island of Trough was a failure. In this dimension, a similar island to the one from the Treq dimension was shifted within a similar island to the Trough dimension, rather than from the sky above the island. This resulted in the two islands fusing together, causing mass destruction and suffocation to the people of Treq. A major casualty from this miscalculation includes the suffocation of the Treq Zeroy. This is due to the island fusing within the ground where this Zeroy rested. Without a Zeroy to fulfill any previous duties or to cause destruction to the land, the island remains fairly peaceful. Although many were killed from this failed shifting process, those that survived did not have to worry about any other dangerous forces. Zeroy opens a portal to the Treq dimension, but as he enters through it, one of DIMO's gigantic hands grabs hold of him immediately. DIMO noticed Zeroy was finding him faster and faster with every time he escaped. He had to weaken Zeroy just a little more. As Zeroy broke away at the fingers clenched around him, DIMO began to open another portal. The portal opened up. DIMO looked down at his hand, tightly holding Zeroy. He noticed a gleam of purple light shining through the cracks between his fingers. Suddenly, DIMO knew what Zeroy was trying to do. In one swift moment, DIMO raises his other arm and strikes down on the arm holding Zeroy, brutally slicing it off. The hand would only hold Zeroy for so much longer. DIMO quickly escaped through his portal. Zeroy blasted his way out of the grasp of DIMO's severed hand. His condition was far worse than before, with even more cracks from the heavy pressure of DIMO's grip. The current dimension is known as the Treq dimension. The island here is comparable to the one in Chapter 1, Part 3 of Treq. This dimension shows what would have resulted if the brain chips implanted by the Xandromanians into the infection to control them as infection beasts went haywire. In the war of the Xandromano against Tarragon, the effort to convert infection into controllable weapons on the battlefield was higher than ever. Though, this process was rushed, leaving the artificial intelligence that was implanted inside the infection to become too sentient. This was due to the combination of the artificial intelligence and the infection's natural instinct to kill and spread. Although the infection successfully defeated Tarragon, it also turned on Xandromano, killing them as well. Eventually, the infection became a sort of hive-mind entity, killing all living creatures and beings on the island and taking over the place for itself. After many years, the infection becomes one with the island. All life that managed to exist and survive was now corrupted with infection, forcibly living symbiotically with it. Now left with only two hands, DIMO felt his demise was approaching. Fighting back may damage Zeroy, but ends up damaging himself more. DIMO had no other option but to be cursed to forever escape Zeroy until the end of time. DIMO opened the portal to the next dimension he would escape to, and waited. After some time, Zeroy's portal began to open. DIMO escaped once more. The current dimension is known as the Treq dimension. The island here is comparable to the one in Chapter 1, Part 1 of Treq. This dimension shows what would have resulted if Zaboomski and Blagoonsky never existed. They were the very reason for why everything happened the way it did in the Treq dimension. The island was void of intelligent life. The place that was there from the beginning, completely empty. It was smothered with trees and greenery. The place seemed to be so peaceful without inhabitants. Was the real cause of all destruction this whole time the people themselves? Or was all the destruction and despair out of the control of the people? It was driving him mad. DIMO could not escape Zeroy for much longer, let alone for the rest of time. He knew that Zeroy would never stop chasing after him because of his indomitable drive. Zeroy suddenly started to open his portal again, but this time, DIMO had a thought. What if he just didn't escape? What if he just admitted his defeat and let Zeroy take his life? DIMO hesitated, but turned and opened a portal to escape once more. The current dimension is known as the Trad dimension. The moon is similar to Cyanus. This dimension shows what would have resulted if the Leroy that caused the dimension shift never existed. This allowed for the mansion people of Trad to successfully reach the moon and harvest the energy-rich resources from it. The moon was named Citrinus due to the plentiful amount of citrinium located on and within its surface. Citrinium, which is comparable to cyanium from the Trough dimension, is the most powerful resource in the dimension of Trad. Leader of the mansion people in Trad, John Carter, ruled the civilization created on the moon. This civilization was developed with immense energy of citrinium harvested by the central power plant on top of the large citrinium deposit. The civilization rapidly expanded, constructing a massive energy shield around their base for extra protection, along with the additional energy fields protecting every location on the moon. Although John Carter succeeded in controlling the power of citrinium, he wanted more. But with his ever-growing age, John would eventually reach an ending point to his life. John decided to shed his weak flesh and to rebirth into something stronger and unaging. An artificially created organism was developed to be capable of withholding the incredible power of citrinium by having it flow through its veins. This laboratory-born creature would be the vessel of John Carter's mind, allowing him to surpass his old limitations and to ascend into something superior. John transfers his mind and conscience into the creature. John's old body is left to die as his new self awakens. John could no longer be seen as himself. Rather, he was known as DIMO, the Citrinium Abomination. Almost instantly after the creation of DIMO, the ground of the moon shook. A being bursted out from beneath the ground. They were known as Amberon, god of the Trad dimension and guardian of citrinium. Amberon fought against DIMO to stop him from getting any stronger, but it may have already been too late. Even with his creation happening not too long before, DIMO was already extremely powerful because of the citrinium in his veins. The fight between the two lasted a while, but eventually came to an end with DIMO victorious. After DIMO became god of the Trad dimension, he felt what it was like to be truly above those around him. No longer was he the same species or divine status his people were. He was so much more than anything and everything. DIMO went on a rampage to become stronger and more powerful. He followed this bloody road and never looked back. The moon civilization on Centrinius eventually established a new leader in the place of John Carter. The people of the moon base continued to expand, but were losing hope after being abandoned by John Carter. As soon as he became DIMO, it was thought as if all that John did for his people was so that he could attain more power for himself. It had been roughly a decade since the death of Amberon and DIMO's abandonment of the civilization. Since they would not be welcomed, returning to the planet below them was no longer an option. The people had no other choice but to accept their lives the way it was. Why did he do it? Why did DIMO keep escaping, knowing well that his life would either be brought to a quick end by the wrath of Zeroi, or prolonged to an endless life of torture and unending escape from Zeroi? But yet, DIMO kept striving to live on. Why? DIMO looked at the moon in the Trad dimension, his home dimension. If only he could tell himself back then to never strive to become as divine as he is now. If only his younger self knew the terrible end that awaited him if he kept following the path he was going down. Through all the deaths and destruction he put others through, and for what? A spot on the divine hierarchy that would just be taken by the next being that thirsted for his blood. DIMO began to cry, something he hadn't done since becoming a god. For the first time in his invaluable existence, he felt worthless. A portal began to open. Zeroi slowly floated out of it. DIMO looked over at Zeroi. Zeroi glanced back. Zeroi charged directly at DIMO. DIMO swung one of his massive arms back at Zeroi. DIMO, himself, no longer understood why he was fighting anymore. Zeroi sluggishly dodged the attack. They were both exhausted by the virtually endless battle between them. Zeroi used up tons of his diminishing energy and went in to attack DIMO. The punch against DIMO's massive arm shattered it. Chunks of the arm flew haphazardly around DIMO and Zeroi. The Zephians residing on one of DIMO's arms still survived, but with the destruction Zeroi was causing, it could be the end of their existence. DIMO looked down at his being. He had a nub of an arm left after Zeroi's attack, along with two deeply fissured arms with their hands demolished, and one last surviving arm that was in no better condition than the rest of them. Zeroi was on the verge of death, his whole body fractured and falling apart in pieces, along with his robotic hand completely destroyed. The two stared at each other, withholding from any combat for the first time in 2 years. Zeroi broke open the containment in his chest, revealing the zeronium crystal inside. It began to glow brighter and brighter. He made no attempt to mask what he was about to do. Zeroi planned to completely sacrifice his body and the zeronium crystal to fire a beam of energy so powerful it would obliterate DIMO in one swift blow. This was the moment he would have to decide. Escape and continue this torture, or perish and let Zeroi steal the spot on the divine throne from him. DIMO reached his shaky arm out to open a portal to escape, but hesitated. He looked back down at the moon civilization. The zeronium crystal vaporized into a massive energy blast directed straight towards DIMO. The beam of energy pierced through the god.